find something about so big. And there was, I probably made the error of that. Oh, I'm going to send this back to Japan. Did I hit it? Oh,
This is great.
no,
I love our bell. Yes, let's keep that forever. All right, let's go ahead and start.
Yeah, fine. They're on the way.
Yeah.
On the part about this is
That's all right. I've got a couple of people watching online too, so I don't want to wait for them or make them wait for us while we look for people. All right, so today I want to talk about this guy. His name is Akhenaten, and that's his family next to him, behind him, and he's worshiping the sun disk Aten. And we've already had a class on Egyptian religion in general. But this person deserves his own little discussion and subject, which is what we're going to try to do today. And what he does is completely reverse almost every aspect of Egyptian religion that we've discussed. He does it, but he does it backwards in almost every respect. And it's amazing, and it's even more amazing when you put it in the context of what we've already learned. So let's talk for just a second about what we already know from our other classes about Egyptian religion, because that really places this in a context that makes it even more flabbergasting. It's really the only word for what he does. Egyptian religion is conservative. Think about the most political conservative American you can think of and double their quota of religious and political conservatism, and you get Egypt. And so you remember we can classify religions in terms of what they think the problem with the world is, what they think the solution to that problem is, and how to implement the solution. And the Egyptians felt the problem with the world was Isfet. Isfet's over here, injustice, violence, but I think you could also translate it as decay and entropy. The problem is things aren't ordered, and the solution is order, especially divine order, or Ma'at. And this is the goddess Ma'at on the right side here. So decay represents everything: death, political instability, and they would sacrifice a little bit of social justice for a lot of political stability any day of the year, because that's what they wanted out of life: stability, continuity. And so to change things is a big deal, because the religion is about resisting change, resisting entropy. You also have to put this in the context of how long we've been at it. The Amarna Revolution, Akhenaten, happens during the New Kingdom, right down here, about 13,000 BC, 1300 BC, excuse me. And that's several hundred years before Moses, or from the Exodus at least, and 1,000 years at least. Because I think the earliest date for the Exodus is 1200 and somewhere between 1200 and 1000. No one really knows, but that's quite a while. Several hundred years, excuse me, before the Exodus would have happened. And if you look back, several thousand years have passed, and in several thousand years, art has changed almost not at all. Religion has changed almost not at all. You can worship the same gods. You can read the same language. An Egyptian from the New Kingdom can walk into an Old Kingdom pyramid and read the inscriptions on the wall from the pyramid text and understand them and think, these people are worshiping the same gods as me. This is basically the same religious beliefs I have. And that's 2,000 years of continuity. And along comes a guy who says, there aren't many gods, there is one God. I'm only going to worship one God. And he's going to depict him different ways. He's going to have a different artistic style, different religious traditions, different political institutions. He's going to move the capital. And this is just unbelievable. It would be unbelievable if it had happened anywhere. And the fact that it happened here is even more unbelievable, which is why it's worth its own class. Now, we don't know very much about him. So frankly, it's going to be one of the shorter classes I've taught, because there's not that much we know. And the reason we don't know much is a lot has been erased. The later pharaohs erased everything they could find from him and from his legacy because they wanted to pretend it never happened. Because that violates their concept of a continuity of Egyptian tradition going back thousands of years. To have this blip on the radar is just, it's embarrassing. And so they erased all mention of him, all mention of his name, and all mention they could find of the religious teachings he taught. So we don't know a lot, so we have to guess, we have to reconstruct, and we have to do our best to try to make it make sense. So that means we don't know a lot about what I consider one of the most interesting subjects in Egyptian history and religion, and it's one of those subjects we don't know much about. It's unfortunate. That means this class is going to be a little bit shorter than the others, and that's okay. You'll be excited to go home a little bit early. So interesting but short. And so this is the 18th dynasty. Ahmose, all the way down to Horemheb at the bottom. Tutmosis, you'll notice some of these names are famous. Hatshepsut, you've probably heard her name. We didn't talk about her much because this was an Egyptian religion class, not an Egyptian history class, so we haven't talked about a lot of the pharaohs. But some of these names you've probably heard. Hatshepsut is a female king of Egypt, queen of Egypt, who rules. Her son Tutmosis, the second, the fourth, Amenhotep. These are names you've probably heard. And then we have right here Akhenaten and Tutankhamen, probably the most famous of the Egyptian pharaohs, because he was the least famous. We'll talk about how that worked in a minute. So these are the ones we're going to talk about because this is the Amarna period. These are the pharaohs involved in this innovation. This is Amenhotep III, which is where we're going to start, and his queen, Tiye. We found her mummy. They actually didn't know. When I went to school, we didn't know that was her mummy. Some DNA testing has shown that we're almost certain that is the mummy of Queen Tiye. One of the reasons we don't know who these people are is because all their tombs were robbed. A lot of their bandages were unwrapped so that they could get at golden medallions and things that were buried with the mummies, and that destroyed the names that would have gone with them. But then they left the mummies behind. The Egyptians wanted to preserve these royal mummies, and they gathered them all up and stuck them in a cache together. And so here are these royal mummies, but we don't know who's who and which is which. And so again, we had to rely on DNA testing. But this is Queen Tiye. What I find I didn't even know about this when I went to school. This wasn't on our radar, and I was preparing for this class, and a picture of Queen Tiye came up, and I said, "You're kidding? That's her?" And I've heard about her all my life, and there she is, and you can see her. And frankly, that's a fairly well-preserved face. You look at it, and it's a person. You can look at that and say, that's a person I could know. I can recognize the features. If I passed her on the street, I would recognize her. And that's amazing to me. So I don't know how old she was when she died, but she outlived her husband. So this is part of the story. Amenhotep III is possibly the greatest pharaoh in Egyptian history. This is Egypt at its height, Egypt at its peak. This is when Egypt conquers its neighbors, becomes a colonial power, and begins trading with lots of different places, and really asserts itself. And Amenhotep III is a military man. He's a conquest, and he's a trader, and he's a politician, and he's a diplomat. And this is really Egypt at its best. He marries this lady, Queen Tiye, and we used to think she was a commoner. I believe there's still debate about that, but the consensus these days seems to be that she was actually related to the royal line in ways that I didn't understand when I did this. This is stuff that's still changing, and maybe that's related to the DNA work. I don't know, but I do know that when I was reading about this, she was considered a commoner, and when I've read about it preparing for the class, they say, no, she was part of the royal family. But it was usually considered this strange thing that Amenhotep married this person who is a commoner. They thought, maybe now that's not true. But she was supposed to have, foreign influence of some sort. Now, I want you to think for just a minute of the Bible. King Solomon, right? When King Solomon starts worshiping other gods, it's because he's influenced by his wife. This is the way this story used to go. she's a commoner. She has different religious beliefs. Amenhotep is influenced by her, and it starts this whole thing off. He said, now I guess we're not so sure. But what we do know is that at the time of Amenhotep, there were two capitals, one in Thebes and the other in Memphis here. So Memphis and Thebes were the two capitals of Egypt. One was religious, the other was administrative, which means that you'd go to one and the king would have a palace there, and he would have all of his viziers there, and he would have his bean counters and his tax collectors and his bureaucracy. Think Washington, D.C. Egypt had its share of bureaucracy. It had a lot of bureaucracy to run this country. And they would all live, up here in Memphis, and then you'd go down to Thebes. Every so often, the pharaoh would travel to Thebes for these religious festivals and ceremonies, because in Thebes is where the temple at Karnak was. Now, if you remember my last class, the temple at Karnak was the temple where we read that liturgy from the temple, and we talked about what they did in the temple and the rituals they performed. That's the temple they performed them at. That's the biggest temple in Egypt. It's this huge complex of lots of buildings and interconnected pylons and big thing. It's the most massive temple in all of Egypt. And across the causeway from it is the temple at Luxor, and these are connected by this causeway. Beautiful buildings. If you go to Egypt, that's the one place you really must go see. Better than the pyramids. Okay, so those are the two capitals. Well, for some reason, he moves his capital. He moves it from Memphis down to Thebes. I don't know if it's because he's a very religious man, or if he's trying to connect closer to the gods, or if he just, maybe he's getting old, and maybe he moves, like we go to Florida or something when you get old or something. Go ahead, what were you going to say, Chuck? This is the Red Sea. No. There's Aswat, Abydos. I need to zoom this map out. 50 miles. So Memphis is, about 200, 300 miles from Thebes. And I think it's another 200 or 300 miles north to the sea, but I don't actually know exactly how far. But this is the palace he builds. I have a close-up, and I should have brought the close-up. He makes his palace out of mud brick. And this is the new palace that he builds. What's interesting about mud brick is it doesn't last quite as well as stone. You'd build the temples to the gods out of stone, but he built his palace out of mud brick. But it was plastered and then very beautifully painted. And so there's just, knee-high level ruins there, but right along the floor, you can see the complex paintings. The whole floor, we would have considered it gaudy, bright colors, and just covered with walls and scenes and depictions, and it would have been beautiful. And this is the ruins, and I don't know where, and I've tried to figure out where in this picture it is, but somewhere connected to this temple, he built what he called a pleasure lake. He had a whole, some people have swimming pools, he had a lake. And he boasted that his lake was so big that his wife could sail her boat on the lake. So she had a sailboat that she could sail on this lake. Let me see if I can get my notes to come up. I don't know where they went. They seem to have vanished. Well, so Memphis is very close to the sea then. So maybe he went to live next to the seashore in his old age or something. Original year 11, under the majesty of Amenhotep III, ruler of Thebes, given life, and the great royal wife Tiye, may she live. Her father's name was Yul, her mother's name was Tiye. His majesty commanded the making of a lake for the great royal wife Tiye, may she live, in her town Jajaruk, near Akhmin. Its length is 3,700 cubits, its width is 700 cubits, and His Majesty celebrated the festival of the opening of the lake in the third month of inundation, day 16. His Majesty was rowed in the royal barge, Aten It in the lake. I don't know if I said that, Aten It. Aten It means the Aten gleams. So she's got a boat, and she's named it after the Aten. A hint of what's starting to happen, and this is again one of the reasons we thought, maybe the queen had some influence, but we know that this pharaoh is at least influenced by Atenism, whether it's from him or from his wife, it's harder to say. The dazzling sun disk of all lands is the new name he takes. So when pharaohs take a new name, they always had these 5 special names we talked about last time, and they were ritually and magically significant. So for the pharaoh to take a new name is a big deal, and he took upon himself a new title that the other pharaohs hadn't, called this dazzling sun disk of all lands. Now, this is related to the Aten gleams. The Aten is a solar deity. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But you can see some of this starting to creep in. He died. He was buried. He was buried in a spur of the Valley of the Kings, which has not been used before. He was the first pharaoh buried there, so there's a little bit more innovation going on. And his wife outlives him, which is a big deal and maybe relevant. He had a son who had lots of titles, and he was grooming his son to succeed him. His son's name, let's see if I can figure this out, was Thutmose. So Thutmose was supposed to succeed him. This is a picture of Thutmose over here, and is laying down on the sarcophagus thing. And over here is his name written on a coffin sarcophagus for his favorite cat. So his cat died, he had it mummified, and we have a sarcophagus for Thutmose's cat. Now there's several pharaohs named Thutmose, but this is Prince Thutmose because he never becomes pharaoh because he dies before his father. So the crown prince is dead, the pharaoh is dead, the queen is alive, and the younger brother takes the throne. His name is Amenhotep IV. He marries a lady named Nefertiti. So you've heard of Nefertiti, and I know you've seen the bust, this famous artistic statue. And this has actually become almost synonymous with Egyptian art. And the irony of it all is this looks nothing like Egyptian art. This is an innovation. This style of art is an innovation, and it's become so famous, and it's not typical Egyptian art. So, Amenhotep IV. Now, Amenhotep finishes his father's tomb, buries his father in the traditional style, finishes his father's temples. He actually was a co-regent with his father, so his brother died, and then his father made him a co-regent to prepare the succession. So for a few years, he reigned with his father, possibly because his father's health was bad. He had bad gum problems and abscesses in his teeth, and he may have been in such pain that he just couldn't reign anymore. His son took the throne, or helped as a co-regent, and then his father died. So the first few years of his reign seem fairly normal. He's finishing his father's temples to Amun. Now, remember, Thebes, where they move, is the capital of worship of Amun-Ra Sonter, Amun-Ra, king of the gods. The temple at Karnak is dedicated to him. So he finishes these temples in Karnak started by his father to Amun-Ra. But then he starts building his own temple. When he builds his own temple, it's not to Amun-Ra, it's to the Aten. He builds it in Thebes, the first one he builds in Thebes. So what is this Aten? Well, first, Amenhotep. Amenhotep means Amun is pleased. That's what his name means. After his father dies, he reigns for a few years and changes his names to Akhenaten. It is beneficial to the Aten. Who is this Aten? Well, Aten is a minor Egyptian deity. He's been around for a while. They mention him in the Book of the Dead. So the Aten is a deity that has been around for a while. It's not a new deity, but it's kind of a minor deity. Sometimes it was associated with Horus, sometimes with Ra. It was the sun disk, but it was, the sun in one of its several manifestations. The bright rays of the sun descending. So you've got a picture of the sun with the arms reaching down, and this is the sun shining its rays upon us. So if you stand outside and you raise your arms and you feel the sun beating down upon you, you're basking in the glow of the Aten. And this is, Amun-Ra is already, or Ra is already the solar disk, the god of the sun. Amun was this god of hiddenness, one of the original creator gods, who is associated with Ra and becomes Amun-Ra, who is this king of the gods, a synergy of two deities. and the Aten was maybe one of the manifestations of the sun, whereas Ra was this other solar deity, and they competed. And again, we talked last time about how this probably worked. The Egyptian gods, not last time, about 2 times ago, the Egyptian gods were gods for each city. Each city kind of had a patron god, and sometimes they overlapped. You had 2 patron deities from different cities who were both gods of the sun. So you just merge them together and go on with life. And the Egyptians did this all the time. And so Aten is just one of these many solar deities. He's a minor deity, and no one paid a lot of attention to him until the Pharaoh took the name Aten and then started building temples to the Aten in Karnak. It was originally depicted as a falcon-headed man, much like Horus. The full title of this god is Ra Harakti, who rejoices in the horizon. In his name is the light which is in the sun disk, Ra Horus Aten. It was likely a synthesis of very ancient gods, Horus, Ra, etc., viewed in a new and a different way. It's both masculine and feminine, and this is the interesting point. It was originally depicted as a falcon-headed god, like I said, but what Akhenaten will say is it's not to be depicted in any anthropomorphic or not even with an animal head and a human body, but you just don't draw it this way. You draw it this way. You just draw the sun with its arms reaching down to shine upon you. And so there is a sense here that I know you'll probably find similar to Israelite religion. Now, there's a lot of debate about how influential this was on Israelite religion. It's several hundred years too early to be kind of directly influencing. It's not like Moses grew up in Akhenaten's court or something. But there's so many similarities that it's interesting. And so it's at least worth considering. The problem is the means of transmission would be difficult because this religious tradition was erased from history. Where would the Israelites have got it from? In 10,000 BC, so 300 years later, 300 or 400 years later, where would they have got it from? How would they have made contact with it? But it's similar. So again, the means of transmission is difficult, but it's similar enough that maybe what you could consider is that some of these concepts had maybe been floating around in these pagan traditions already in other places. Maybe both Israel and Egypt were influenced by some other outside force. It's hard to say. But there's a lot of similarities you will notice. The first is this no anthropomorphic representation. The Israelites are big on that. It's one of the 10 Commandments. So he starts what should be called maybe a new religion. So that's debatable. Is this a new religion, or is it just on one pre-existing deity? Well, yes, it's both. So new religion, question mark. Is this new, or is it just a remix of something that's already been there? Well, I really feel like everything is a remix. Things aren't invented out of nothing. They're invented out of the milieu around them. So it's a new religion in as much as Christianity is a new religion, even though it borrowed from Judaism. It's a new religion, even though in the same sense that Mormonism is a new religion, even though it borrowed from Christianity. It's a new religion in that sense, I think. And what kind of religion is it? What name do you put on it? In my title to this talk, I called it monotheism. That's debatable. So if you go to the Capitol, that we'll get to this Capitol in a minute, and look around and dig, you'll find statues to lots of gods in the city that Akhenaten makes. So he's not, executing people for worshiping other gods. It's entirely possible that the worship of other gods was even practiced and tolerated and approved, even approved of. It's hard to say. But what we can say is that he starts saying Aten is the only God. And so we have hymns, and I'll read one where he says Aten is the only God. Now, what does that mean? Well, you can interpret that lots of different ways. One of the ways you could interpret it is there are no other gods. Right? So the Islamic, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. You could say it this way, there are no gods but Aten, and Akhenaten is his prophet. But whether that's really the way they thought about it is something that people still debate. It's not that clear. One of the other ways that they may have been thinking about it is this belief in many, but a consistent worship of only one. So that's something you actually see a lot in the pagan worlds, even today. And that's that, there's lots of gods, but this is my patron god, and I'm going to worship him. In fact, I believe that the evidence is very strong that Israel's earliest manifestation, the Israelite monotheism, started that way. The Bible as we have it is influenced by the people who compiled it, edited it, and then ripped parts out of it to hide pieces they didn't like. And they missed some spots. So if you date the text by the Hebrew, which you can do, right? If I were to say something like, man, that's bad, I'm probably in the 80s. I mean, we can get down to almost the right decade based on how people talk. Well, you can do that to the Bible, and you can go through and you can kind of date stuff based on the archaic or non-archaic use of terms in the text. And if you do that, what you find is that the very oldest Hebrew that we find in the Bible also has some of the oldest ideas. And those oldest ideas are not strictly monotheist. So, for example, we have some very intriguing passages in Psalms and in some of these other prophets where they say something like, God divvied up the nation to the various deities, and he gave Israel to Jehovah. God, divvied up the nations and gave Israel to Jehovah, to Yahweh, to control. That is a remnant of polytheism. But you notice it's not standard polytheism. It's polytheism of this form, this monotheism and others. There's lots of gods, but if you live in Israel, in Egypt, you're supposed to only worship this one. There's lots of them out there, but just worship this one. So that could be what we're seeing with the Aten stuff. But again, they allow people to worship these other gods. But Akhenaten, maybe he only worships one. Again, it's hard to characterize what's happening. That's why I'm giving options. It could be strict monotheism, but I doubt it. It could be this version of there are many gods, but we only worship one. But it could also be, and I don't know quite what term to use for this, but this plural unity concept. And that is something that the Hindus did, which is there really is only one true source of everything, but there's lots of manifestations. And maybe what he's doing is he's saying, hey, there are all these gods, Amun-Ra, all those things are great, but they're just a manifestation of the one. And so it's not that you can't worship Amun if you want, but by worshiping Amun, you're just worshiping Aten. And the Egyptians were already syncretizing their gods, combining, mixing, matching, and maybe they felt like you could do that because they were all manifestations of one thing anyway. And that one thing for Akhenaten is the Aten. So there's a lot of variations and shades of monotheism, and this isn't modern Jewish monotheism by any stretch. But it may look a lot like early Jewish monotheism did. Because early Jewish monotheism looks nothing like modern Christian and rabbinic Judaic monotheism. So what he does after this is he's got to get out of Thebes. Now, he may have been chased out, frankly. He's the Pharaoh, he had lots of power, but it's not entirely clear that the priests liked what he was doing. I mean, to some extent, he's putting them out of a job. Think about it that way. He's going to be unpopular. Whether he moved on purpose or was chased out, it's hard to tell, but he goes to this place where he builds a new capital. Today it's called Tel Amarna, which is where this whole Amarna revolution thing comes from. It's where we get the name Amarna, but that's a modern term for the place. That's not at all what they called it. The Amarna isn't a name that they would have associated with this movement at all. It's just our names for it, and it's based on this location, Tel Amarna. What they called is the Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten, and when he got there, he erected 4 stela that marked the boundaries of this new city he was going to build, and there was nothing there. He went to a place with nothing. And so there's advantages to nothing. You get to start over. There's no temples to other gods you have to worry about. There's no, competing real estate. You can build what you want. You can start completely over. Now, I have seen other people make this analogy, not just me. I like to make Mormon analogies, but I'm not the only one who's compared this to Brigham Young taking the Mormons to Salt Lake City, where he can find a place where they can be left alone to do what they want religiously with no interference because there's nothing else there. Plus, he gets to start from scratch building his own temple. I don't know exactly how far Tel Amarna is. I need to get myself some better maps on these things. But he was definitely moving himself into the desert away from everyone else. Now, what's interesting about this place is he says that God showed him where it was supposed to be. So again, he marked it with 4 boundary stones, and then on one of them he said that the Aten appeared to him in a vision and showed him that this is where the new city was supposed to be. Think Zion. We're going to go build Zion. So this is where the city of the Aten is going to be. And if you wonder where his vision came from, if you look at this place, there's a mountain behind it. And the mountain remember I showed you the shape of the hieroglyph for the horizon? Because that was on the pylons for the temples to Amun-Ra, Sonter in Karnak. They had these big pylons and they were in the shape of the horizon because when you passed into the temple, you were passing the horizon. Well, the Aten is the sun disk in the horizon. That's kind of what his name is. And the city sits right on top of a mountain with a big horizon shape hieroglyph behind it. And the sun will actually rise. If you sit and stand in the city, the sun will rise between the mountain peaks. And so he may have actually, his vision may have actually been, he just walked up and saw the Aten rise and said, vision, right, in the horizon. So he claims a vision and he builds his city in this place that has religious significance in its very landscape. Halfway. See, this is the great thing about the internet. Anything you don't know, you can look up. The answer to the question earlier is this city is halfway between Memphis and Thebes. And then we decided they were about 300 miles apart. So, yeah, what were we going to say? Well, it sits on the bank of the Nile, so you can trade. And so this is the great thing about Egypt is if you're going downriver, the current will carry you. If you're going upriver, the winds will carry you. And so the Egyptians were really bad sailors just because they didn't need to be good. They were lazy, and they didn't need to learn how to do it well because you just put your sail up and go upstream. You put your sail down and you go downstream. And so, but that does mean that they are good at trade. When he gets to this new city, and I don't know what natural resources are right there, but again, trade makes that kind of unnecessary to worry too much about. You can build wherever you want as long as you're next to the Nile. It is a desert area, so it probably doesn't, get to grow a lot of food there, but I don't know. I don't know exactly how the Nile flood impacts the fields near it where you can grow food. This, however, when he gets to the city, the first thing he does is build a temple. This one, however, is the temple he built at Karnak. So we're going to back up and look at the temple in Karnak. Then we'll look at the temple he builds in Amarna. And you'll notice it's all kind of stacked together and guesswork reconstruction. You can see how it's been pieced together. There's a reason for that. His temple in Karnak was torn down block by block. And when one of the successor pharaohs was building his pylon at Karnak, he filled his pylon with these blocks. It was a great way to use them so that they could be useful, but no one would ever see them again, he thought, and he could make sure that to the Aten were hidden. He could erase it from history. What he actually ended up doing was preserving it for time and all eternity, because when they started doing archaeological work at Karnak, they dug up all these old blocks from his pylon, and they thought, oh my goodness, look at this. And they took pictures of all of them, and they put them into a computer, and the computer happily rearranged the pictures until they could create a reconstruction of what the temple looked like. So it was beautifully painted. You can, of course, see the Aten here. You can see him worshiping the Aten. And there's all sorts of interesting daily life scenes. There's religious rituals. There's all sorts of wonderful stuff written on the walls of this temple. But what we don't have, is kind of the floor plan, because all we got is these blocks. But if you go to Amarna, you've got this. This is the temple at Amarna. And again, Amarna was razed to the ground almost in retaliation for this pharaoh's innovations. And there's not much there. But what we do have here is a floor plan. It's almost, there's some altering place, there's an open courtyard, there's some pillars. it's an open floor plan, and we haven't seen that since the Sun temples of the Third Dynasty, Third and Fifth Dynasty, I think it is, Old Kingdom stuff. Remember those old Sun temples that I showed you, and I said they're kind of weird and they don't look like anything else? Well, this looks like that. What's interesting to me about it is it's open. Now, last time I had this whole discussion about temple ritual. What do you do in an Egyptian temple, and what do Egyptian temples look like, and what does it mean? Now, if you remember, you start in the courtyard, and as you work your way into the back of the temple towards the Holy of Holies, the ground goes up, the ceiling comes down, and the space constricts, and it becomes ever more exclusive. So as you work your way back, you become increasingly sacred. You move your way into increasingly sacred space, increasingly protected space, and you're entering kind of the womb of the universe in the back. And there in the back is the statue of the deity, in the dark, secluded return to creation, to the moment of creation. But if you worship the sun in kind of this way, and you worship the sun's rays, you just take the roof off. And if you want God to be in his temple, you don't need a statue of the temple. In the courtyard of the temple at noonday and look up and raise your arms to the sky, the sun embraces you in its light shining down upon you, and you feel its warmth, and God is there already. And so the temple is completely different. No statue, no Ark of the Covenant sort of thing. Remember I showed you those Egyptian boats that were like the Ark of the Covenant? None of that. Just a big, open to the sky floor plan where you get to see the deity and bask in his rays and possibly offer offerings and rituals, etc. Okay. Then we get this, Akhenaten's Hymn to the Sun. This is about 4 pages long. I apologize. I am a extremist nut, such that I'm actually going to read the darn thing to you because I just can't help it, and that's who I am, and you're going to have to bear with me because I'm going to read the whole thing. But when I do, I want you to, I don't know how much of you you've read of Psalms, but has anyone actually read Psalms cover to cover? Some of you have read Psalms. You want to actually go through Psalms and find passages someday and put them parallel back to back and kind of put Akhenaten's hymn on one side and a psalm on the other and see how similar they are. We believe this was actually written by Akhenaten. Akhenaten is a religious... Now, we can't judge other people's intents even when we have a lot of records of them. But it looks to me like he's a true believer. I like to think of this as, Jim Jones starting his own little cult and taking all the hippie flower children off into the desert somewhere to dance and sing and do their hippie thing. And except instead of Jim Jones leading these people, it's the Pharaoh of Egypt leading these people off into the wilderness to start this new religion. And there must have been a certain amount of religious excitement, and he seems to be poem, and it's believed to actually be him. The writer seems to really feel it, and I'll let you be the judge of that, but I get the impression he believes what he's saying. Step down where I can get in the light. So let's talk about this. Let your holy light shine from the height of heavens, O living Aten. So you can imagine someone standing and watching the sun and saying, let your light shine, and feeling, when you stand in the sun, you can feel it, right? You know that warm feeling you get on your skin. And source of all life, from the eastern horizon, rising and streaming, you have flooded the world with your beauty. You are majestic, awesome, bedazzling, exalted, overlord over all earth. Yet your rays, though they touch lightly, compass the lands to the limits of all your creation. There in the sun you reach to the furthest of those you would gather in for your son. Who's his son? This is the interesting bit. We've got a God. He's abstract, neither male nor female. You don't make depictions of him. He's this Aten ray in the sun, in the sky, but he has a son. Akhenaten is the son. This was always, to some extent, how the pharaohs reigned. They were the representative of the God on earth, and they were the ones who made the offerings and represented the deity. Well, he's going to claim at this point to be the Son of God, the son of the Aten. That should sound, again, familiar. Well, this is why this is interesting to me, because there's so many similarities to Christianity, to Judaism, and yet no reason for them to be similar. No, it's really hard to figure out how you would connect the dots from here to there. And maybe you can't. But if you can't, that means there's something in our human psyche that recreates the same sort of thing over and over and over again. But here we have a Son of God, a representative and mediator between God and man, in this case in the king, the Pharaoh. And in the case of Jesus, of course, the King of Kings, the kingdom that is not of this world, but the King Jesus. All right, the Son of God. So there in the Son, you reach to the furthest of those you would gather in for your Son. This is the gathering to the city. They're going to build this holy city. Again, that's similar to Jewish religion and to Mormonism and all sorts of interesting Zionist movements. They're gathering in for your Son, whom you love. Though you are far, your light is wide upon the earth, and you shine in the faces of all who turn to follow your journeying. When you sink to the rest below the western horizon, earth lies in darkness like death. Sleepers are still in bedchambers, heads veiled, eyes cannot spy a companion. All their goods could be stolen away, heads heavy there, and they never knowing. Lions come out from the depths of their caves, snakes bite and sting, darkness muffles, the earth is silent. He who created all things lies low in his tomb. This is how horrible it is when the Aten leaves. It's the night, it's death. But then, earth dawning, mountains and the horizon. Earth dawning, mounts the horizon, glows in the sun disk of the sky as day. You drive away the darkness, offer your arrows of shining, and the two lands are lively with morning song. Sun's children, awaken and stand, for you, golden light, have upraised the sleepers. Bathed as are their bodies, who dress in clean linen, their arms held high in praise of your return. Across the face of the earth, they go to their crafts and professions. This is now life. So the sun sinks, death. The sun rises, life. Rebirth. The herbs are at peace in your pastures, trees and the vegetables grow green, birds start from their nests, wings wide spread to worship your person, small beasts frisk and gambol, and all who mount into flight or settle to rest live once you have shone upon them. Ships float downstream for sail for the south, each path lies open because of your rising, fish in the river leap at your sight, and your rays strike deep into the great green sea. That's their name for the Mediterranean. It is you who, now, what we have there is a connection to nature that is again beautiful. This is why I called them the hippie flower children. There's a connection to nature in all of this, to the fish, to the animals, to the sun, to the cycles of rising and setting. It is you who create the new creature in woman. Now, this is interesting because what he said so far, you could kind of have said about any solar deity, but now he's going to kind of go off the rails. You create the new creature in woman. So when a woman is pregnant, it's because Aten did it. You shape the life-giving drops into men. When men ejaculate, it's because Aten did it. Foster the son in the womb of his mother, soothe him, ending his tears, nurse through the long generations of women. To those given heir, you ensure that your handiwork prospers. When the new one descends in from the womb to draw breath, in the day of his birth, you open his mouth to shape his nature, and you supply all his necessities. So Aten is responsible for the baby's first breath, which is that moment when spirit enters, because spirit is the wind that lives inside of them. But you shape his nature. That's interesting. It's almost a predestination. People are good or bad because the Aten made them so. Hark to the chicken and the egg, he who speaks this in the shell. You give air within to save and prosper him. It's almost you're the one who makes sure the chicken can breathe inside the egg. That's what it said. And you have allotted to him his set time before the shell shall be broken. Then out from the egg he comes, from the egg to peep at his natural hour, and up on his own 2 feet he goes, when at first he struts forth therefrom. We're about halfway done. I told you this is long. I can't help myself. How various in the world you have created, each thing mysterious, sacred to sight. O sole God, besides whom is no other. That phrase, sole God besides whom that's all over the place in Isaiah. The later, second Isaiah especially. This is a phrase that you'll see over and over again in the Bible. And it's a statement of monotheism, or at least these variations thereof. You fashioned the earth to your heart's desire while you were still alone. Now we've gone even further. He made the earth, right? So the sun supposedly now is the creator of the earth. You filled it with man. He's created the earth, created people, family of creatures and each kind on the ground, those who go upon feet, on the high soaring on wings, to the far Kor and Cush, and the rich black land of Egypt. And you place each one in his proper station, where you minister to his needs, each in his proper food, and the years of life are reckoned to him. It's like God knows when you're going to die and when you're going to be born, and your life is reckoned. That's another phrase that will pop up in biblical passages. Tongues are divided by words. Nature's made diverse as well. And even men's skins are different, that you might distinguish the nations. You make happy the Nile stream through the underworld and bring him with whatever fullness you will to preserve and nourish the people in the same skilled way you fashioned them. You are the Lord of each one who wearies himself in their service, yet Lord of all the earth who shines for them all. Now I want you to notice something. These are just passages that sound, he's praising his God. But this reference, Lord of all the earth, is actually significant. Because in the past, we've had these passages, each god is Lord over his own city and has a patron city, but the Aten is a Lord over the whole earth. That means they're trying to extend this to a general God for everybody. All of the far foreign countries, you were the cause they live, for you have put a Nile in the sky, that he might descend upon them in rain. So now he's a god not just of the solar disk, but of the rain. He's a rain god. These are the things you normally see. You see solar gods, you see rain gods, you see gods of fertility, gods that take care of women's childbirth, and he's gone through all of them and associated them all with Aten. He makes waves on the very mountains, like the waves in the great green sea, to water the fields in their villages. 2 more pages. How splendidly ordered are they, your purpose for this world, O Lord of eternity, happy in heaven. Although you belong to the distant peoples, to the small, to the shy beasts who travel in the deserts and lands, yet happy he comes from below, for the dear Lord of Egypt as well. And your sunlight nurses each field and meadow. When you shine, they live. They grow sturdy and prosper through you. Yet your seasons to light the world flower and flourish, winter to rest and refresh it, the hot blasts of the summer to ripen. And you have made heaven far off in order to shine down therefrom, in order to watch all your creations. Now, he created heaven too, just so he could shine down from there onto the earth. Now, here we get the conclusions. You are the one God. That passage, there was one God, and he says, you are the one God. That is, again, very much like the Old Testament. Shining forth from your possible incarnations. Now, that's interesting. This is where we get the idea that this could be a variation like we see in Hinduism, where there's lots of gods, but they're all incarnations of this one God. But it could be saying something even more profound than that we are all kind of incarnations of God. That is also a concept that we see in Buddhism and Hinduism, that we're all part of the universe itself, and the universe itself is God, and we are all ourselves, therefore, part of the divine. It's possible that that's where this is headed, but it's hard to tell. We don't have enough other texts to tell what they meant. Revealed like a king in glory, risen in the sky and now distant, now bending nearby, you create the numberless things of this world from yourself. So now that means we are created from God himself. We are parts of the divine, who are one alone, cities, towns, fields, the roadway, the river, and each eye looks back and beholds you to learn from the day's light's perfection. O God, you are in the sun disk of day, overseer of all creation, your legacy passed to all who shall ever be. For you fashioned their sight who perceive your universe, that they praise with one voice all your labors. So God made it so that made us from himself so that we could see him and see ourselves and see him in us. And you are in my heart. There is no other who truly knows you but your son, Akhenaten. This is where we get the kind of theology where we connect Akhenaten as his prophet. There is no God but Aten, and Akhenaten is his prophet. So I'm the only one who really knows you. May you make him wise with your innermost counsel, wise with your power. The earth may aspire to your Godhead. This is almost like Solomon asking God to make him wise. I am your son. You love me. I know you. Please make me wise so I can be a good king. That the earth may aspire to your godhood, its creatures fine as the day that you made them. Once you rose into shining, they lived. When you sink to rest, they shall die. For it is you who are time itself, the span of the world. Life is by means of you. Eyes are filled with beauty until you go down to rest. All work is laid aside. As you sink down the western horizon, then shine reborn. Rise splendidly, my Lord. Let life thrive for the King, who has kept peace with your every footstep. Since you first measured the ground of the world, lift up the creatures of earth for your Son, who came forth by your body of fire. I don't know how that theologically worked, but it's the idea that Akhenaten came forth from God in fire. How he came to that conclusion. But notice this, you first measured the ground. There's these great creation pictures from Judeo-Christian traditions where God is depicted with a compass measuring the world. And you measure it, and by measuring it, you lay it out and you create it. It's a typical creation scene, one often borrowed by the Freemasons who like to use the compass as the symbol of God, drawing the compass of the world. So he measured the world, and by so doing, he created it. So that's a hymn. Now that was long. I apologize for the length of it, but I find that entire thing just fascinating. It's one of the texts we have that tells us something about not only that there was this new religion, but what it entailed, what they believed, and you can feel emotion in it. There's this desire to praise this deity, not just to believe in it, that is moving. But he doesn't just change the religion, he changes the art. We already said some of this, but here's I wanted to give some examples of stuff that, people see pictures of him all the time, and he looks a little different, pot-bellied a little bit. And there's this question, are they drawing him that way because he's actually deformed? But then you see pictures of other things drawn by these same artists, which raises questions. Is there a foreign influence on the art? Trained in a different school, a different place that came? They don't look like anything else you see Egyptians drawing elsewhere. Here's another example. This is the one you always get, the pot belly. This is Akhenaten worshiping the sun rays of the Aten over here, making offerings here. This is an offering table, and this is his wife and his family, his child and his wife, Nefertiti. Again, the question was, is he deformed? He's got these wide hips. Or is this a move towards realism and artistic, conventions? But again, when you look at pictures of him, you can ask those questions. When you look at these, you kind of say, no, I think this is just a different style. He's probably not. It's not a depiction of his deformity or something. There's this new artistic convention. Now, again, that doesn't sound like a big deal until you realize that this artistic convention has lasted 2,000 years. It's going to last another 1,000 years. And the religious tradition of Egypt is all about establishing ma'at, which is continuity, and you do it by repeating the ritual magic elements of the myths. The myths set forth the order, and you duplicate them, and you repeat them. And that's how you establish order. And when you change something, you're not duplicating the myths anymore. They were so systematic about it. They had changed, tomb painting into paint by the numbers. You'd put up a grid, and you'd draw the picture on this grid, and there was a very systematic way. The head would fit this part of the grid. And have you ever done those, things where you try to duplicate a big picture by drawing little squares of it? That's how they put these things on their temple walls. Paint by number with grids. And this is completely different. And again, that is astounding. It doesn't sound astounding, but when you put it in its context, it is. Now, the other thing we have from the Amarna period is what's called the Amarna Letters. They're not written in Egyptian. Most of them are written in cuneiform because they're communications between Egypt and its, sometimes between other nations, but sometimes between, officials in the Egyptian empire. You remember before this, Egypt had just reached its peak. They had all these colonies established all over the place where they were ruling, and they had viziers there, and they were writing letters to the Pharaoh, and some of these letters are heartbreaking because they'll say something like, I'm caught like a bird in a net. Please help, send the army. And then they'll repeat, where are you? Why are you not answering my letters? And you get, the impression that he's gone off into the desert to do his mystic prophet thing, and he's ignoring the normal statesman requirements of running a kingdom, and the kingdom is falling apart. At least the external empire is falling apart. The people are writing to him saying, help us, save us, send the army, and he's not going anywhere. In fact, it was traditional for the Pharaoh to lead the army in these expeditions. The Pharaoh was supposed to go at the head of the army, and when he gets to his new city, he says this thing, I will never leave it. It was some ritual thing like, I've entered the city and I will never leave again, and he never does. He dies there, presumably. And he's certainly not out leading the army, and the army isn't responding to these people's requests in these letters. These come save us, we're in trouble, we're being attacked, why aren't you protecting us? And so there's something going on where in the midst of his religious reformation, things are in decline. First, the priests aren't going to like what he's doing because he's putting them out of a job to some extent. Even if it's only soft monotheism, he's putting them out of a job. They're not going to like it. And the empire and the military isn't going to like what he's doing because he's ignoring the military. And you ignore the militaries of your nation at your risk because the military has the power to seize the throne if they want it. They enforce your right to reign, and if you ignore them long enough, someone else eventually reigns. So succession. At Akhenaten's death, there are at least two royal descendants. One is called Akhenaten It, causing the Aten to live, and Tutankhamen. He is 8, she is 9. She's his half-sister and the daughter of Nefertiti. He is the daughter of some other pharaoh, Pharaoh's wife. We don't know who she is, but one of his other wives, so they're half-sister and brother. When he dies, we have records, sparse records, of 1, maybe 2 other pharaohs who reign. Now, again, this is because of the erasing going on. It's really hard to piece this part together. We can piece some of the stuff that happens to Akhenaten together because of the excavations of his city. After he dies, his city is abandoned, and exactly what happens now is really hard to piece together because it's been erased. And it's not happening, in that city where we might be able to do the archaeology and piece it back together. But after some sort of maybe 1 or 2 pharaohs rising and falling, and who knows who they are and how they're related to anybody, 2 people end up on the throne. And their names are Tutankhamen and Akhenaten It. Now, these names are not the same as these names. But if you put 2 and 2 together, you realize these are the same people because their names are the same except for Aten has been replaced by Amun. Amun was the god of Thebes that Akhenaten rejected when he changed his name and left. And these 2 kids move back to Thebes. One becomes pharaoh, the other becomes the wife, the great wife of the pharaoh, and they begin to reign. Now, he's 8, she is 9. They are not calling the shots. I don't know what their religious beliefs are, but I do know that they're not in charge at that age. They have a vizier. His name is Ai. So we presume that Ai is calling the shots. Because he's the vizier, it would make sense. Ai was actually with Akhenaten in Tel el Amarna, in their kind of experimental hippie commune city, and he was with him. So presumably, maybe he believed in Aten. It's hard to say, or maybe he was just a politically expedient sort of dude. But once the pharaoh dies, he gets the idea that it would be a good policy to move back to Thebes and get the priests back on our side. So this is a picture of Tutankhamen and his wife. We have lots of pictures of the two of them together with these kind of depictions of two young people in love. And it's entirely possible that they are the beautiful love story that their depictions try to predict. It's hard to say. Once he returns to Thebes, we get a stela from him with this carved on it. The temples of the gods and goddesses were in ruins. Their shrines were deserted and overgrown. Their sanctuaries were as non-existent, and their courts were used as roads, and the gods turned their backs upon this land. If anyone made a prayer to a god for advice, he would never respond, but I will fix it. So he's going to go back to the old ways. Again, whether he is or someone else is going to do it for him is open for debate. Then, as a very young child, he dies. He's very hastily buried. His tomb is one of the smallest in the Valley of the Kings, probably had the least amount of treasures in it. And yet we know all sorts of things about him and his treasures, and why? Because his was the only tomb found intact and unrobbed. Why? No one was looking for it. And the reason no one was looking for it? Right after he dies, all records of him are erased. So in an attempt to erase this man from the record, they've made sure he is by far the most famous Egyptian pharaoh that we've ever known or probably ever will know, because we have his stuff. And it's amazing. Golden gilded chest, sarcophagus with this beautiful funerary mask. And he's the most famous pharaoh in Egyptian history today. And I'm sure he would be ecstatic. There's this idea, how did the Egyptians feel about their tombs being, robbed? Well, they hated their tombs being robbed, but when their tombs are taken and their, antiquities displayed for the world to see, one of the ways they felt like they had eternal life is to be always remembered. And Tutankhamen was forgotten and almost erased from history, and now everyone knows his name, and I think he's ecstatic. Or would be ecstatic to know what has happened, to have all these people looking at his mask. I mean, they hid these things, but the reason they hid them was so they wouldn't be robbed. But if he thought it could be put in a museum and it wouldn't be robbed and everyone could come look at it and worship me, he thought that would be neat. I mean, this is every pharaoh's dream, and he's got it, all because they tried to erase him from history and failed. If you go back to this statue, you see how it's defaced and broken? Intentional attempt to erase him from history. It was reconstructed. You notice it's broken right down the middle. They had to put it all back together. His face was damaged. This is the sort of thing they were doing to try to erase him from history. And yet his tomb was the only unrobbed tomb, partly because of the attempt to erase him from history. Okay, so how did he die? Well, it used to be fashionable to predict that he had been murdered. In fact, I teased everybody with that in my email that I sent around. Was Tutankhamen murdered? Well, we think he died of natural causes. Some of this research is new. X-rays can only tell you so much. Now we're doing CAT scans, DNA testing, and there's all sorts of things going on. And the modern consensus is some of the breaks. There was a crushed skull. So we thought maybe he'd been hit over the head. Now we think, no, that was probably done after his death. Something happened to the mummy where it was damaged. There's some broken bones. We think that all happened after as well. Turns out that the mummy wasn't very carefully taken care of when Carter found it. Carter was a great archaeologist, but the mummy wasn't the big thing. He wanted to get at the golden box and be able to read what it said and look at the texts. And this mummy was in the way. And the resins that they had used to embalm the mummy had stuck the mummy to the bottom of the coffin, and he actually cut the mummy in different places to try to peel it off of the. And so it's possible that some of the injuries sustained to the mummy that they saw in the early X-rays were post-mortem. However, if he was murdered, which you still can't rule out completely, he died young. We now know from DNA testing that he had malaria twice. 2 different strains of malaria. He had a foot injury that meant he probably had to walk with a cane. There were lots of canes found in his tomb. He's not shown that way in his pictures with his wife, but he probably walked with a limp and a cane. And it's entirely possible that his injury, his leg especially, became infected, and that's how he died. But if he was killed, you can imagine at least 2 scenarios. You can imagine a believer of Aten kind of coming along and saying, "You're putting all the old gods back. You're abandoning the Aten, and we've got to stop you," killing him. If so, that was fairly ineffective because I followed after him, and I just kept on going with the whole restoration of the original. The other, though, is that he grew up his whole life. He'd never been to Thebes. After his father dies, he moves to Thebes and starts the new capital and restores the original. He's not doing that. I mean, this child had never been to Thebes. He'd never left, presumably, the city his father had built. Why would he leave? Probably because somebody made him, his vizier or something. And if he started to grow up and at some point said, that religion my dad had that I grew up with, that was pretty neat. Let's, starts thinking about going back. You can imagine someone killing him over that. That's why there's so much speculation about why he was murdered. The other speculation, though, is this Hittite letter. We have a letter that the Hittites record, where the Egyptians wrote a letter, the Egyptian queen, after the death, presumably after the death of Tutankhamen. Now, there's some debate about which Egyptian queen wrote this letter, because we have it from the Hittite archives, not from the Egyptian archives. The Egyptians would have erased it, but the Hittites kept it. So Hittite queen writes and says, "My husband has died and I have no son. They say about you that you have many sons. You might give me one of your sons to become my husband. I would not wish to take one of my subjects as husband. If you do, I will make him king of Egypt. Bring him quickly. I am afraid." Now, there's been some speculation about which of the pharaohs wrote this, because remember, there was a couple very quick pharaohs in quick succession right after Akhenaten dies. But most people think this is the wife of Tutankhamen. In Tutankhamun's tomb are 2 fetuses. She miscarried twice, and they embalmed the fetuses with Tutankhamun. So there is no heir. She has no son, which is why it's probably not, the wife of it's not Nefertiti. They had a son. Well, Nefertiti didn't have a son, but maybe that's what this is why there's some debate, right? Nefertiti, you could imagine Nefertiti writing this letter because Tutankhamun isn't her son. It's her husband's other wife's son. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because, unless there was some really bad blood going on between the 2 of them, that's all in the family. This looks like something much more sinister. Well, you can imagine the Hittites' response to this whole thing. Egypt wants to put one of my sons on its throne. That's nuts. Right? And that just doesn't happen. She's desperate and crazy to think this is going to fly. And so he doesn't believe it. He actually delays, and the delay is his undoing. He doesn't believe it, so he sends one of his servants down to Egypt to see if it's true. And his servant comes back. Now, can you imagine how long it takes to go from the Hittite all the way down to Egypt and all the way back? And when he gets back, he says, "It's true. The Pharaoh is dead, and this queen wants to make your son Pharaoh." And he's like, "Goody!" And he sends one of his sons with a whole entourage, an army and bodyguards with him. And halfway there, he's ambushed and murdered. So there's at least one murder that goes along to this story that we know for certain. The Hittite king's son is murdered, and the Hittite king is not happy because his son was just killed by the Egyptians who had promised to marry him to their queen and make him queen. Instead, this guy becomes king. This guy is I. This is actually a picture of I on Tutankhamun's tomb, I believe. But actually, maybe it's on his. I'm not sure. And this is Tutankhamun. You can see the name here, Tutankhamun. This is I, and it's written in cartouche. And he's wearing the leopard skin of a priest of Egypt, and he's performing the opening of the mouth ceremony on Tutankhamun's mummy. Remember that ritual where you touch the different parts of the mummy with this little instrument here? You say your mouth that you may speak, and your eyes that you may see, and your your ears that you may hear, and then you touch the different parts of the body. He's performing this ritual on Tutankhamun, who was his predecessor, and he will take the throne after him. Is not related to Tutankhamun. So we have now a pharaoh who has died without a legitimate successor. And has taken the throne. Will reign for a few years, maybe because he can't hold it together and he's murdered, but who knows. But maybe also just because he's an old man. He takes the throne in his 60s. That was old back then. And this guy, Horemheb, takes over after him. Horemheb is not an administrator. He's not a vizier. He dies without having any royal children either, leaving another succession crisis. Horemheb shows up, and Horemheb is a military man. So I said if you ignore the military long enough, eventually the military takes over. And that's what's now happened. Unfortunately, Horemheb also dies without any children or a legitimate successor. And so the pharaohs that follow him are a new dynasty, Dynasty 19, and their names you will remember or know. Ramses, Seti, and Ramses II the Great. And these pharaohs erase, starting with Horemheb, Horemheb actually begins the erasure, but starting with Horemheb, they will erase every record of these people that they can find, because they're all tainted by this heresy and this lack of continuity and this un-Egyptian moment in history. And there's nothing more Egyptian than Ramses, Seti, and Ramses the Great as we go back to where we started from. And all reference to these people is forgotten until the tomb of Tutankhamun is found and the city of Amarna is excavated. And so this is Egypt's dalliance with monotheism. I hope it's been as much fun for you guys as it has been for me. I love this story. I love these people, and I love the mysteries surrounding them, especially if you want to figure out the succession between Tutankhamun and Akhenaten. That's crazy. I have no idea what happened, because there's names, there's cartouches, there's people claiming that. Who knows what happened? Was there a co-regent? Is this person a male? There's one person, we don't even know if it's a queen or a king, and we don't know if he changed his name or it's crazy stuff. So if you really want to have fun figuring out puzzles that you'll never be able to solve, go look at that stuff if you want. So that's the end of Egypt. I really am done with Egypt. We are going to do several topics. I'm considering having between, we've done Egypt, now we may do some topical thing instead of a specific place or religious tradition. We might do something like sacred clothing and show how sacred clothing is used throughout all religious history or something like that. And then we'll dive back into another place and we'll do Mesopotamia. So we'll have some topical discussion. It'll probably be sacred clothing, but it might be sacred covenants. I'm going to have to work my way through what we're going to do. We'll do some topical thing. Then we'll go back to another place. We'll do the same thing we did with Egypt, but to Mesopotamia. And then we'll find out where we're going to go next from there. So thank you all for coming, and I'll see you next month. Thank you.
Horemheb looks a little more realistic than the standard.
Yeah.
Am I making that up or something?
I don't think so. I mean, there could be some sort of holdover from this earlier artistic realism that you just can't quite get rid of. That takes a while to go back to the traditional style. He does look like a traditional pharaoh, but there's features to his face that you can kind of look at and say, I recognize that guy. He's not just a cookie cutter. Maybe you could pass him on the street and go, oh yeah, that's Horemheb. I don't know. But yeah, like I said, he's a military man. And so his interest isn't probably, there are military people who are really interested in art and politics, but it's probably not in politics, probably not in religion, probably not in art either. He's just hiring somebody to do his statue because he's in charge. But I'm stereotyping based on the fact that the military essentially took over Egypt at this point in their history. Yeah, Chuck. The beard. Egyptian priests are clean-shaven. This is actually why the Bible commands you not to cut your beard. So if you go to Israel today and you see Hasidic Jews, really, really Orthodox Jews, they'll have these rings in their hair going kind of all the way down. And there's this passage in the Bible that says, don't cut the corners of your beard. If you cut the corners, you leave this. But actually what Egyptians did is they shaved all of it, and you can actually see on some of these statues a string going around their neck, because this is a false beard, and you actually wore it as an ornament. But I don't know exactly why, but there's a connection between the beard and authority. And so the Egyptians were clean-shaven, and then they wore a false beard if they sat as a pharaoh or someone with kingly authority. And so one of the ways you make an Egyptian a priest is you shave his head and his face and his beard. So there's this dual thing where you want to have a beard because you're the pharaoh and the beard represents authority, but you want to be clean shaven because you're also the priest of the god, because the king is the king and the priest. And so they had this false beard thing that they wore. And when the Israelite religion tells you not to do something, it's usually not because they just don't like doing it. It's because they're trying to tell you not to be like, do what these other guys are doing. And so don't shave the corners of your beard is an attempt to tell you don't join the Egyptian priesthood, don't act like a priest, don't dress like the Egyptians. We are different than the Egyptians. Don't look like them, don't dress like them, don't act like them, because we're setting ourselves apart. And of course today they still have these ringlets in the Orthodox circles, but again they're doing something that is slightly unrelated to the intent of the original commandment, because they've forgotten where it originally came from. So that's an interesting connection between the false beard and the Jewish kosher laws today. We have something similar with the don't mix milk and meat. I mean, you know the reason an Orthodox Jew won't eat a cheeseburger is because there's a commandment in the Bible that says, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. We now know that is a Canaanite ritual. You take a kid, you boil it in its literal mother's milk, and that's part of how you offer this particular sacrifice to a Canaanite god. So the commandment is, don't worship Canaanite gods by practicing Canaanite rituals. Jews didn't know where it came from, a couple 100 years later, 1,000 years later. They don't know where it came from. All they know is they're not supposed to boil a kid in its mother's milk. And then this question comes up in the middle of their rabbinic debates, which is, well, how do you know when you mix milk and meat that the milk didn't happen to come from the kid's mother? I mean, can you be perfectly sure? Well, so we're just not going to mix milk and meat at all just to be sure. And so it gets further and further afield from where it came from until suddenly you can't have a cheeseburger. So, which has nothing to do with the origin of the commandment. Then you have to have separate dishes because you might get a little bit of the milk on the dish and then a little bit of the meat on the dish, and you never know, there could be some little remnant left. So now you got to separate your dishes, and it gets more and more complicated. And they know this. I mean, they're not, Orthodox Jews aren't unintelligent and aren't uneducated about these issues, but for them it's a tradition that demonstrates their love for God. Whether it's the tradition and whether it's connected to the original origin of the commandment or connected to the tradition as it's been built up over time is irrelevant to this connection they get to God by following the tradition. So I don't want to make fun of that. That's actually a beautiful sort of thing. But it is interesting then to pull in the history and see where it came from and kind of scratch your head and go, wow, not eating a cheeseburger is very far removed from where this came from. And the same comes from the ringlets, and the beards of Egyptian pharaohs and kings. So, any other comments, questions? I believe my wife brought some food that's over here. You're welcome to come have some, and I'll see you next month.
So is it likely that Akhenaten was literate?